Well, hey there, 506 Now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Tom Dupree joins us. At one time, the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the United States. I want to talk to him about Robert Hur's testimony yesterday, what it means for Joe Biden and our country, as well as a big decision by Fulton County Judge McAfree today to throw out a number of the charges against Donald Trump and his co-defendants. The left is panicking. CNN and MSNBC are really scared of what's happening there. You know, meaning it's a good thing. You can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. A lot to get to with you. I want to get to Biden's budget proposal as well. I have some notes on that I want to make sure to hit. I was just listening to Rachel Sutherland talk about that on the news break. But first, let me take Dustin in Winchester, line one. Dustin, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Vincenzo, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, sir.
What Robert Hur did was he obstructed justice. It wasn't his job to play judge and jury for President Biden. It was his job to determine whether or not the law was broken. So the other part of this is I'm wondering what prestigious law firm he'll be working at since he left the DOJ.
Yeah, I do wonder about that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I know he lays out, I get there's something called prosecutorial discretion, right? You're supposed to be able to have discretion about what you prosecute. But look, he's been assigned to this case. He's a special counsel. He investigates it to no end. He figures out that, every element of a crime has been met here. It seems crystal clear to anyone who's paying attention. And then he's like, but I'm not going to recommend charges here. What? That's
let the judge or the jury decide that. That's how our system of government works, or system of law works. The other thing is,
especially in contrast. Let me pause on this, Dustin. Wait, I'll get with you in a second here, but just especially with contrast the way that Donald Trump is being treated by the United States Department of Justice. He's being charged for things he was allowed to do, and Joe Biden is not being charged for things he wasn't allowed to do.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Dustin.
And the other thing is, so Biden made $8 billion off of his book. I wonder how much money Robert Hur thinks he's going to make off of his book.
We'll see.
I mean, if anybody would buy that piece of crap.
We'll see.
So, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. It's interesting. And, of course, the left is, like, angry at Robert Hur. You see that? They're mad at him. Hur didn't charge Biden. Hur let Biden get away with it. It's like, I just didn't have enough. What do you mean you didn't have enough? They're mad that he said anything about Biden's memory failing him, which, by the way, was his rationale for not charging the guy. Adam Schiff was all grumpy about this. He was, like, attacking Robert Hur yesterday in the hearing. He attacked Robert Hur again on television. Let me see here. I do have audio of that where, Schiff is like, how dare you? You're disparaging him. You are attacking him. Oh, here you go. This is a political situation. You don't add language like that. Republicans might use it against Biden.
You don't gratuitously do things to prejudice the subject of an investigation when you're declining to prosecute. You don't gratuitously add language that you know will be useful in a political campaign. You were not born yesterday. You understood exactly what you were doing. It was a choice. You certainly didn't have to include that language. You could have said, vis-a-vis the documents that were found at the university, the president did not recall. There is nothing more common. You know this. I know this. There is nothing more common with a witness of any age when asked about events that are years old to say, I do not recall.
That's not what
Indeed,
happened.
They're instructed by their attorney to do that.
He was so all over the place. He got things completely wrong. He really didn't know about the year of his son's death. He didn't know when he was vice president of the United States. This is not I can't recall territory. It's like, how the heck did you get that wrong territory? Jake Tapper at CNN thought Adam Schiff was being ludicrous yesterday. And here's how he gently said that.
More than fine for her to say with respect to this category of documents or that, this is what the president said. But this was deliberate. It was as if Hur decided there's not enough evidence to prosecute him, so I'm going to politically slime him instead.
Okay, what he would say were he here is, I had to explain why I wasn't prosecuting him. You've made that decision as a prosecutor, right? I'm not going to take this, I assume, I'm not going to take this case before a jury because I don't know that we could win it. This person's going to seem sympathetic, or I can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt, etc. And that's, I mean, look, part of what he said in his testimony today was, that we thought he did things willfully, but he explained, President Biden explained things, that he forgot or whatever, and we couldn't necessarily impugn the claim of that he just innocently forgot. We couldn't do that. That was another thing that he said. Didn't he have a responsibility, Hur, to explain why he wasn't prosecuting this person?
Yes, and that explanation can be, we didn't find sufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury that he met all of the elements of the offense. We couldn't prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. We couldn't prove that beyond a reasonable doubt.
Except, of course, it was like so overwhelmed. I mean, they had recordings of the guys saying, "Hey, I found a bunch of classified information. I'm going to send it over."
Without, what you don't do per Department of Justice policy is not only observe care in not essentially pejoratizing, damaging the reputation, injecting yourself in a political campaign, but doing the opposite.
Even he realizes how ridiculous this spin is.
Opposite. Hur understood this report would be public. He knew every word of it.
It was going to be FOIA.
So he wasn't supposed to tell the truth. He was supposed to lie. Upset about that. Jonathan Turley had this reaction, a sober one.
No matter how you feel about prosecuting the president, this report is damning. What was done here is wrong. And you would think that from what the Democrats were saying, that they were going to give the president an approval for great housekeeping of classified material. Hur showed over and over again that the president lied after his investigation was over. The president said that it was Hur that raised his son's death. It was the president. He said that Hur essentially exonerated him. Hur said he didn't. He said that, there was no evidence that he willfully did anything. Hur said exactly the opposite.
Yeah, and a bunch of the Democrats up there on the dais yesterday were like, so he's exonerated, right? Biden's exonerated? And Hur kept saying, no, that's not what I concluded. I didn't say that. That's not in my report. That word never appears in my report. Jonathan Turley points that out and says, Dems are delusional.
At points, the Democrats seemed almost to border on the delusional when you had Hur say, I did not exonerate the president, and then Democrats would say, okay, so you exonerated the president, and he would say, no, I didn't, and they'd say, thank you for that, with that exoneration.
Just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. Now, can we use Biden's failing brain to excuse the news this week that he wants to explode our debt to the most unbelievable levels imaginable? Yesterday, the report comes out, Biden plans to explode the national debt to $43 trillion by the end of 2 terms, if he is so blessed as to have another term. He wants to increase the national debt to $43 trillion. President Joe Biden releasing a budget proposal that projects that the total federal debt subject to the statutory limit would increase by at least $14.8 trillion during his presidency were he to be elected to a second term and were his budget proposals enacted. When Biden was inaugurated on January 20th, the total federal debt subject to the limit was $28 trillion, according to the Daily Treasury. As of March 7th of this year, the total federal debt subject to the statutory limit, has risen to $34.3 trillion. That's the national debt. You know how you feel that? Well, that's inflation. The government, the Fed, the money they print, and the effect it has on you. Your taxes go up in the form of inflation. $34 trillion. What do you think this means for your children? We're now at the point where service payments on the debt are higher than what we pay for the entire U.S. military. That's unsustainable. And so Biden wants to explode it to $43 trillion. By the way, yet another reason why he should not be reelected president of the United States. So those are the estimates here. And what does he want to spend all that money on? Well, let's see. Biden is seeking a bailout for Blue City illegals. Neil Monroe over at Breitbart, the great Breitbart news website, Biden wants $13 billion from Congress for illegals and sanctuary cities. President Joe Biden's staffers are asking Congress for more than $13 billion in taxpayer funds to help move many more, quote, economic migrants into homes and workplaces in American communities. Much of the money will be used to bail out the sanctuary cities that help displace Americans by welcoming migrants who serve as lower wage workers, apartment sharing renters, and taxpayer aided consumers. The 2025 funding is being requested by two pro-migration cabinet members. That would be Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Alejandro Mayorkas. This is where I add the impeached Alejandro Mayorkas, the Cuba-born head of the Department of Homeland Security, Neil Monroe points out. Neil, by the way, I know Neil. He's a great reporter. He's an Irish-born reporter, loves America, and thinks we should have a sensible immigration system. What a crazy idea. Their plans are outlined in the 2025 budget request to Congress released on Monday, March 11th. The funding request likely will be approved unless the Republicans win a House and Senate majority in November. If approved, the 12-month suspending could begin on October 1st of 2024. So there you go. And also we have massive inflation report this week saying inflation is horrible. Over at the RNC, one of their Twitter accounts, more on the RNC in a second. I got to talk about what's happening at the RNC. One of their Twitter accounts, the RNC research account, that's a must follow. It's a great follow. They say Biden's new budget proposal calls for eliminating $50 million. What could we cut up $50 million from? A lot of things. Do you know what they want to cut it from? The wall. Biden wants to cut $50 million from wall funding as the country faces an unprecedented illegal immigration crisis. They're proposing to rescind $50 million in border wall funds provided to Customs and Border Protection back in 2021. They'd like to cut that because, Donald Trump set that up, and now I guess whatever residual efforts to build a wall might exist, they'd like to strip that away. It's the only time they want to cut things is when it involves making our country less secure. Oh, yeah, we don't need that. Frivolous spending. A wall. Who would need one of those? So that's the plan. So the RNC, I'm seeing a bunch of headlines this week. I don't know if you've encountered these, but perhaps you have. Washington Post. RNC fires dozens of employees after Trump-backed leadership takes over. New York Times. Trump aides taking over RNC order mass layoffs. Politico. Bloodbath at RNC. Trump team slashes staff at committee. Now, here's what we know. The Republican National Committee no longer has Ronna Romney McDaniel as its chairwoman. She's out. She left. And in her place is a guy from North Carolina by the name of Michael Whatley, Trump's preferred candidate. He is now the head of the RNC. And Lara Trump is also there to help steer the ship. And they've decided that in an election year, they're apparently going to lay off a bunch of people, clean house, and bring in a whole new team and try and focus on excellence. And, of course, the RNC's job is to win elections for Republicans. And over at Axios, they say it's a harbinger of things to come. Trump's RNC shakeup signals plans for 2025. And so the way the left is framing this, by the way, is, look at what an authoritarian he is. No, Trump is the party nominee. Trump is the head of the party. Trump's goal is to win elections both for himself and the candidates down ballot. You need an RNC that is equipped to do that. Why wouldn't he be entitled to moving the ball in the right direction? President Trump's ousting of a huge chunk of the RNC's staff is a preview of what he plans to do with federal agencies if he's reelected in November. Oh, thank God. Please. Gut the federal government. Get rid of the people working against the American people. Why it matters. This is Axios. They always include things like that. The Republican Party is now effectively the Trump Party, they say. Well, Republican voters prefer Trump. I don't know what to tell you. It's been remade in a way that echoes Trump's 2025 plan to oust moderates and nonpartisan civil servants from the government. Okay, that's not true. Who wrote this? Sophia Kai. Sophia Kai, you are wrong. To oust moderates and nonpartisan civil servants? That is not the plan at all. It's to get rid of the political hacks who are buried in the government, who are working against the interests of the American people. When has that ever happened? How about the last Trump administration? It was the whole reason they were trying to devise a scheme to fire people who were harming the American public. We've got to get rid of these people. This is insane. They're not respecting the will of the voters. And so they say the RNC is being I don't know. This to me, for now, it seems encouraging. I hope it works. I mean, because the RNC needs to get back onto a good track record here and start winning some elections. If this does it, that will be great. Of course, we in the process, we're always seeking interviews with all these people. And our plan is to talk to them and find out more on your behalf. And Donald Trump has secured all the delegates he needs, by the way, to officially be the nominee of the party.
CNN can now officially project that Donald Trump has eclipsed the delegate threshold to officially clinch the Republican nomination for President of the United States.
Here's Donald Trump's team last night.
Hello, everyone. It's your favorite president speaking to you on a really great day of victory. 1 week ago, we had something called Super Tuesday, and it was indeed super because we won at numbers that nobody has ever seen before, records in virtually every state. And tonight, likewise. But this one got us over the top.
There he is, your favorite president. Oh, man, the guy's a hoot. All right, coming up, Tom Dupree is going to join us, former Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General. We talked to him about a big victory Donald Trump had today in Georgia as the judge throws out several of these Fani Willis charges. Says they're no good. She didn't do it right. She gets rid of them. Tom Dupree talks to us next. Hey, good afternoon to you. 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL. Where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The Fani Willis fiasco keeps getting more and more interesting today. The judge in that case, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee, has decided that 6 of the counts against Donald Trump and his co-defendants need to be thrown out. 3 of those counts apply to Donald Trump. He's throwing those counts out, and we'll find out why with our next guest. Tom Dupree is a partner at Gibson, Dunn. He's a former Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General as well. Tom, great to have you back with us, sir. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Vince.
This seems like a big deal. A judge says, actually, these charges don't even apply. I'm going to throw them out.
Well, yeah, I mean, he threw them out on their face, meaning he looked at the indictment, he read it, and he faulted Fani Willis and her team for basically failing to give the facts that they thought really gave rise to these crimes. Prosecutors have a duty when they indict someone to put the allegations and the facts in their complaint in enough detail so that the defendants know what they're being charged with and how they have to defend themselves.
Yeah, that's right. He said he described these charges as, quote, having a lack of detail concerning an essential legal element. In other words, I guess Fani Willis and her team failed to accurately depict what part of the law Donald Trump or his co-defendants had broke?
Yeah, so here's the thing. She had charged Trump and the other defendants with this crime under Georgia law. It's a crime to solicit a public official to violate their oath of office. It basically says you can't go to a public official and try to persuade them to do something that would make them violate the oath that they took as a public official. As you know, at least in the federal system, you know, you have to swear to uphold and protect and preserve the Constitution of the United States against all enemies. And Georgia officials take a similar oath. That's what they were charged with. But the problem is the judge couldn't figure out exactly what she was saying was the conduct that Trump and the others were trying to get these people to engage in that would have violated their oath. That was what was missing from the indictment.
My understanding is that one of these charges revolves around this phone call that Donald Trump had with a Georgia official where he raised the fact that he believed that there were more votes available that had not yet been counted in Georgia that would have led to a favorable outcome for him. He was suggesting that we should find these votes. I know they're out there. The left has turned that into, Donald Trump was asking a Georgia official to manufacture votes. Was that story involved in these charges?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question, and the answer is it might have been, but we don't really know. The way that she wrote this complaint, as you'll recall, right, it was the mother of all complaints. It was like a Russian novel with so many characters and allegations and chapters and everything. It took forever to read through to figure out what was going on. And I think the problem from the judge's perspective is he says, look, there are all these things that you say he did and the other defendants did, but I'm just at a loss. I'm out at sea to figure out what precisely you're saying he did that amounted to a crime on these charges.
So what does that tell you? Is that something? Does that tell us something about the novelty of the nature of these charges here? Is it rare for a district attorney to have her charges thrown out by a judge?
Well, it's rare, and I mean, look, honestly, it's embarrassing. That when you prepare an indictment like this, you've obviously got kind of almost all the time in the world, right? You've got weeks, months to make your case, to put the evidence in, to write the complaint in a way that makes it legally valid, and they failed that low bar when they wrote this. I mean, part of it may be the novelty of the charges. I mean, you don't get charged every day with, soliciting a violation of an oath. But I think it also just reflects the fact that they were swinging big. They were swinging for the fences, that they put in all of these charges. They're RICO charges. And as I said, there's so many defendants and so many things going on.
Yes.
I think that no one really ever sat down and said, have we actually alleged in this thing the facts that we think amounted to criminal conduct?
Well, also, this kind of suggests that she's bad at her job. Is that your view?
Well, certainly in this respect, yes. I mean, I have a lot of other concerns with other ways she's handled her job and gone about this, to say the least. But yeah, if you look at what happened today, I mean, kind of a basic duty of a prosecutor is to write an indictment that, satisfies the lowest level of legal scrutiny, right? In other words, this wasn't a situation where, the jury evaluated all of these charges and deliberated for days or weeks and came out with an outcome. No, this is something where the judge just read her complaint on the face and said, I just read this thing and it's invalid. These charges are invalid and I'm throwing them out.
Do you read anything else into the judge's behavior here? There's been a lot of questions about, this week we're expecting whether or not he will disqualify Fani Willis. Is it possible that he's navigating a political environment here where he knocks down a couple of these charges yet allows Fani Willis to stay on the case?
It's possible. I mean, look, we've all read the opinion he issued today is fairly short, and I think kind of, we've all been reading it, trying to suss out that question. I mean, does this signal which way he's going on the disqualification question? And I don't think you really can draw a conclusion one way or the other. I mean, it certainly tells you that he's not about to throw the case out entirely on the basis of what Fani Willis did.
Right.
If that's what he was planning, then, well, he wouldn't have bothered to waste all his time, rifle shooting these three particular charges down if he's going to throw the whole case out in 2 days.
That's true.
So I think we can rule that possibility out, but I think it's still an open question what he's going to do in terms of disqualifying her, disqualifying Mr. Wade, disqualifying the whole office. He was clearly concerned by a lot of the testimony that he heard. You could see it in his body language and the questions he was asking. But I think it's still an open question whether he's going to take that final step and disqualify her.
That's interesting, though. I mean, that is, in some sense, what you just pointed out really matters, which is like if he was going to disqualify her imminently, then maybe he wouldn't have wasted his time doing this today. So 6 counts out of the 41-count indictment. Again, this is not just on Donald Trump. This is also against his co-defendants. That means, by my math, I'm looking at 35 counts that are still holding. Does that say anything about their validity?
Yeah, well, let's see. It says that, there are some counts that are going to survive at least this first test. But what it does really is it narrows this case, not dramatically, because as you know, there still are a lot of charges out there. And look, those charges, frankly, carry a lot of potential, prison time and punishment if you're convicted on them. So it remains a serious case. There's no question about that. But today's order does narrow the scope of it. I think it will mean that if and when this case ever sees the light of day in a courtroom, it will be narrower, it will have fewer witnesses, It will have less evidence because some of these charges have been taken off the table.
Based on everything you've heard, and thankfully this has been a very public hearing, we've been able to see the disqualification hearing play out, do you think Fani Willis and her team should be disqualified?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to see how she continues in the role she's been doing. It's very hard for me to see that happening. And look, I think that it has surprised me. One thing that has surprised me, and as you said, we all saw the testimony. We all saw this play out. Very unusual. And the thing that surprised me is that no one in her orbit has pulled her aside and said, look, maybe you should just step aside in the best interest of everyone here. It's not in your best interest to keep going through this. Prosecutors and prosecutions need to have the appearance, of not being tainted. You always hear talk about the appearance of impropriety is enough. And I think we're well past that line at this point.
Right.
And so you would think at some point, someone, a senior advisor, an old friend of hers, a mentor, someone would pull her aside and say, look, you fought the good fight, but you got to know when to step aside. But that hasn't happened.
Well, maybe that's a sign of how out of control she is. Nobody can even stop her. But, she from what I can see, based on all of the evidence that's been presented, she and her lover, Nathan Wade, have lied to the court, it seems, based on all of the witness testimony that's pouring in saying, yeah, their relationship predated his hiring in the office. He paid her a ton of money. She has no records of these transactions. She claims she repaid him in cash. It's all so crazy. So hearing all that, would the consequences for something like that for your typical attorney simply be you lose the case, you don't get to keep handling the case, or would there be far more meaningful consequences, like perhaps being disbarred?
Oh, there sure could be more meaningful consequences. I mean, once you get up on the stand and start lying under oath, I mean, oh my gosh, you get disbarred, you get charged with perjury. I mean, there's no limit to the consequences that could fall upon you.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, Vince, one of the most kind of almost damning things about the hearing was all those phone records, right? In other words, it's one thing if you've got, witnesses who say, well, yeah, I think their relationship started on such and such a day, because look, we all know witnesses can disagree. People perceive things differently.
Sure.
People can lie. Witnesses are, can be fallible, right? But phone records don't lie. The fact that they had phone records placing him in the vicinity of her apartment at all hours of the day and night. I mean, I don't know how you explain that. And
thousands of calls and text messages.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, I want to switch gears and ask you about Robert Hur, the special counsel testifying yesterday before Congress. Both Republicans and Democrats unhappy with him, but for very different reasons. Republicans thought that everything he laid out suggested Joe Biden met all of the elements of crimes involving the retention and theft and mishandling and dissemination of classified information. Meanwhile, Democrats were angry that Robert Hur included characterizations about Biden's memory in the report that they thought were disparaging, even though he was pretty generous to Biden in the way he described him. How did you view it?
Look, I viewed it as I am 100% confident that Robert Hur knew he was going to come in and have a really hard day, right? Because as you said, the Democrats pounded away on him, the Republicans pounded away on him, and I think his story. I mean, I heard him testify. I read his opening statement, and what he's saying, and the line that he adhered to throughout the hearing was he was just trying to explain himself, why he didn't want to bring charges. That's why he got into the whole, the memory thing and the elderly gentleman, is that he was just trying to explain to the world what led him, given, as you said, the fact that he did have evidence of possible criminal activity here, what led him at the end of the day to ultimately decline recommending prosecution.
Yes.
And that's why all that stuff got into the report.
But does that carry water for you? Is that a normal way a prosecutor assesses a case like this, where they gather all of this deeply damning information, but then they're like, but he's a sympathetic old man with a poor memory. Is that a legitimate way to do this, or is this unusual?
Well, I mean, look, honestly, there's nothing about this whole case that's usual.
Sure.
So I would say it's all been unusual. But I will say this. Yes, I mean, you can have situations, and you do have situations, where prosecutors will pull together a lot of evidence that shows a potential defendant may very well have committed crimes, right? You say, look, we've got this physical evidence, we've got this documentary evidence, we've got 6 witnesses who are going to say this.
Yeah.
We can put on a very, very solid case before a jury, and I'm pretty sure that this evidence would be sufficient to get a conviction. But the question is, am I going to be able to persuade a jury to find beyond a reasonable doubt that this guy is guilty? And that can pose complications, right? Because you can have defendants who, you got a lot of evidence against them, but they would be very sympathetic before a jury. You think about what the jury pool is going to be, where the case is going to be heard. And so I think a lot of times prosecutors, they can and do say, look, we got evidence, but we don't think we're going to get a conviction.
But this standard would mean that no Democrat partisan should ever be charged in Washington, and every Republican defendant should be charged in Washington. You know what I mean? It's like, how's the jury going to respond? Well, the jury pool's 96% Democrat. I think we know how they're going to respond. I think it has a very corrupting influence on our justice system.
Well, and look, you make a good point, right? In other words, we can't have a system where, kind of if you're a Democrat, you feel free to commit crimes in some particular jurisdictions. And I suppose, in fairness, if you're a Republican, you'd feel free to commit crimes in other jurisdictions.
Right.
You can't have that system. You need to have equality. But what I'm saying is that if the question is, do prosecutors consider likelihood of a conviction, putting aside the sufficiency of the evidence. They're just thinking on the basis level,
Yes.
Can I persuade, 12 men and women to vote to convict? Does that play a role in the decision whether to charge? Yeah, you bet.
But when you have Joe Biden on audio saying, hey, ghostwriter, I have classified information, I'm going to share it with you, and then the ghostwriter subsequently takes that audio file and attempts to delete it on his computer, and Joe Biden received $8 million as a book advance for the very book in which he was attempting to include classified information. Well, I mean, you'd have to be the dumbest jury in the world not to realize that seems like a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, look, I will say that I thought Rob Hur was fair in reciting all of that evidence that he found, right? Because you could also see him writing a report in which he was more equivocal,
right,
as opposed to which he was not. And yesterday, when the Democrats were pounding away on him, saying that, well, you basically exonerated Biden, you found him innocent, he pushed back hard on that, right? He must have said at least half a dozen times, I did not exonerate the president, I did not find him innocent, which he didn't. I mean, he didn't use those words in his report, and that wasn't his judgment. He declined to prosecute. But I thought he did an admirable job in holding the line and refusing to give in to the Democrats when they were trying to get him to admit he had exonerated Biden.
All right. Tom Dupree, as always, nice to talk to you, sir. Really appreciate your insight into all things legal issues and everything else, too. Tom, thanks. Nice to talk to you, sir. Yeah, CNN and MSNBC, they're having panic attacks right now about what's going on in Georgia. I thought they were going to convict Trump. I thought they were going to put him behind bars. CNN legal analyst Ellie, is it Ellie Honig? Is that how he goes by? Ellie? Yeah, Ellie Honig today.
You prosecutors, you have to say what part of the Constitution. The judge says there are hundreds of provisions in the U.S. Constitution and in the Georgia state Constitution. And the purpose of an indictment is to give defendants notice so they know what they're defending against. And you can't just say, well, you tried to violate the Constitution. The judge says what you have to say is what specific provisions of the Constitution, what specific sections of the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's not in the indictment. Therefore, the judge says those charges are legally unfounded and now they're dismissed.
I mean, finally, somebody who's like, hey, what does the law actually say? Does it apply to this guy, or is he breaking the law? You don't even lay out the details.
There have been several screw-ups, frankly, by the DA throughout the history of this case. Going back to the investigative phase, the DA got herself disqualified from a small piece of the case because she created a political conflict of interest. The judge who was overseeing the grand jury removed Fani Willis from the case. We've seen Fani Willis make public statements in the church and elsewhere that have now been called into question that I think violate the ethics of prosecutorial rules. And now we've seen six of the charges thrown out of the case. And unlike the conflict of interest issue, this does go to the charges against the defendant. This does go to the indictment itself. And there is still a case. The lead charge, the racketeering case, is still in place, but this is a setback.
This is a setback. So the left is getting angry about this. MSNBC's Caroline Polisi.
It shouldn't have anything to do with it. These are completely distinct legal issues. And certainly his decision on the disqualification, as we all know, does not kill the case in and of itself. He wouldn't dismiss the indictment. It would just be reassigned to sort of a governing body in Georgia to then be reassigned. However, I myself feel, and many other people feel, that that would, in effect, essentially be the death knell for this case.
If she's disqualified.
Another time when Fani Willis was removed from a case in this very case for a conflict of interest, that case is still languishing.
Yeah, so the left is like, they don't know what to do. They're like, oh my gosh, this whole thing's falling apart. It could. We'll see what the judge does. He's supposed to make that big decision this week. Will he disqualify big fat Fani Willis from the case? We'll see. The great one, Mark Levin, up next here on WMAL.